Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Modular. Today I'm looking at the Chaos Devices Batumi 2. This is a Batumi 1. I've had this for a very long time. It's one of the first modules I bought, and it is what you would call a staple, a solid, absolutely find it in every rack, straightforward, 4-slider, 4-channel LFO. It's a low frequency oscillator. It oscillates stuff. You plug it into things to modulate. You move things around. You've got sine waves, you've got square waves, and you've got the 4 sliders with which to control the speed of it, just in a very simple way. There's more to it than that. Of course, there's always more to it than that, but at a basic level, that's what the Batumi offered. It also could be a clock. I would use it originally, the square wave output, as the clock in my system to run whatever was happening, and then I'd modulate with something else and modulate with something else, and it always gave everything a really good sense of movement. It had a couple of interesting modes where you could run the waveforms out of phase with one another, or you could run them sort of divided. So the first one, the first channel, is running everything else. Everything else is following that, but slower behind it. Or they can be just free running, doing its own thing. And in terms of modulation, in terms of spinning LFOs in your system, you could not be more consistent and reliable. What a wonderful, thumpy, spinning, oscillating thing. Low frequency oscillations, movement, those sine waves that you imagine smoothing its way through your gear, bringing things in, taking things out, shifting, moving, dilating, those sorts of words. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing that you can use creatively in any patch, at any point. At the moment I'm just running this through the RYK algo. It's just producing some sine waves over here, and I'm moving the volume of those in and out. Well, I can also change the harmonics manually. Just very simply. But anyway, it's far more complex than that, far more interesting than that. And we'll get to that in a moment. But back to my story about the Batumi. A little while ago, a year ago or so, I think, Behringer came along and went, oh, well, Batumi, that's a nice module. I think we'll do one of those. And so they did. So they've released a Batumi version all of their own for a third of the price. And it makes you go, oh, was this open source? I don't know that it was, particularly. I mean, when things get put open source, it tends to mean that the manufacturer is going, hey, well, I developed this really cool thing. Why don't you have a go at doing that? What they don't probably mean is, hey, multinational corporation, why don't you take my idea and make a shed load of money off it? It's not really the intention behind it. But anyway, putting that aside for a moment, what Chaos decided to do was to redo the Batumi, to make it all the things it could have been. So it's been around for 10 years, and 10 years ago, when they put it together, it was pretty darn awesome. But there were a couple of little things you just go, well, why wouldn't it do that, and why couldn't it sort of do that? And so they've had a little bit of time to reflect, and they've been able to build those things into the Batumi 2. I will take you through all of it while I'm still very much enjoying this modulation. So in the new version, do we just get sort of modulation but slightly better? No, we don't. Well, we do get that. Yeah, no, absolutely, we do get that. Modulation, slightly better. I would say there's two really important things that have come out of this redevelopment of the Batumi. The first one is that it's now actually a VCO. Well, it's 4 VCOs. Each of the LFOs, low frequency oscillators, can be pushed up into audio rate and used as a sound source, as an oscillator. It responds to 1 volt per octave. You can give it tunes and it will play tunes. So you suddenly have, in the similar sort of space as this, you've suddenly got 4 oscillators. 4, not quite voices, but 4 sound sources that you could use to generate chords or intervals, or you could use them together or independently. In fact, you could run an entire synthesizer, an entire modular rack just from the Batumi, using it as modulation, using it as a sound source, a melody source, a bass source, and also it can modulate itself. So that's the first great improvement. I mean, it's massive when you come to think about it. I mean, I had this in my first row, which was just a row like this, and it was very, very useful as a clock and as a modulator. But had it had the ability to also be a proper VCO, then it would have been extraordinary. I suddenly would have had a load more sounds I could have been playing with. And that is what this can do. Stick it in a small system and it's absolutely phenomenal. The other thing they did is that they built in some of the expander things that they did. So for instance, the middle row is completely assignable as to what wave shape it is. Now, on the original one, you had to do that on the back via a jumper. You had to set what it was and then screw it back in, which was not exactly convenient if you wanted to change things at some point. But now you can do that directly on the front panel. It also includes randomization sources as well, so it doesn't have to just be your ramps or your trapezoids or your triangles. It can now be stepped or smooth random as well. And each of those can be set independently for each channel. Assuming you have the Poti II Expander. See, the original one of these, they worked out that people were a bit upset about all this back panel business, and so they created this thing called the Poti. Strange name, something to do with Georgia, I think, something to do with Eastern Europe. Anyway, they created the Poti, and that allowed you to change the wave shape directly on the front of the panel with that. So that now has been sort of sucked in to the Batumi 2, but they've now produced a new expander called Poti II, and that gives us access to each of the channels independently, which lets us assign the waveforms independently. It also allows us to attenuate each of the outputs independently and also shape and modulate them. And that creates some very interesting things. So, just going to the play. It's a beautiful thing. I'm going to bring you in a moment, but before I do, I forget what it was I was going to say now. Oh, it was important. Don't suppose it matters. Maybe I'll think of it later. So yeah, come in close. Let's focus in on this little beastie. And if I can just talk you through it. It's not going to be difficult. I mean, I've just got this in a single row here. I'm not trying to involve all this stuff up here particularly. Just going to focus down on these bits. Just to show you as clearly and as simply as possible, both visually and aurally, of what it is the Batumi 2 could offer. So here we have the Batumi 2, not to be confused with the Veils, which is very similar looking next to it, but this is a VCA. This is the LFO here, the Batumi 2. It's very similar in look to the original Batumi. In fact, you can't really tell them apart. There is a little bit of change here at the mode switch, a little bit of change in the text, but otherwise pretty much identical. What I'd like to show you is just the basics of what this LFO can do. Then I want to show you it as an oscillator, and then just mess around with it in of itself, really. I'm using the algo here as a sound source. This is just a bunch of harmonic sine waves currently, which I'll push around so that they don't seem so boring all the time. So what have we got then? We've got 4 sliders, 4 LFOs. Each LFO on the right mode can be entirely independent. way down, it will take minutes and minutes to do a complete cycle. All the way up, it goes at 100 Hertz, which is fast enough to be able to hear, which we will look at in a minute. But very simply, you've got 4 sine outputs, you've got 4 assignable outputs, and 4 pulse wave outputs, square wave outputs at the bottom. Let me just show you those. They're slightly weird, but I can assure you that they are square waves. So for the assignable, they're based on this wave button here. Now on the original, you had to change it on the back through a jumper, which was not very convenient. So what waveforms do you get? Well, red is triangle, which you can just about see, I think. There you go, there's our triangle. Then you get a sawtooth in one direction or another. And then a sawtooth in the other direction. Then you get a trapezoid in the green, which is sort of like a square wave. And then you get some stepped randomization. That's probably better stuck into pitch, I think. And you get smooth randomization. Totally brilliant. So that's your basic free-running LFO channel for each one. 4 channels doing exactly the same thing. You've got sine wave, square wave and assignable on each one. Completely independent, glowing and showing you exactly what's going on. Beautiful. Now there's a couple of other modes. The next mode is a phase mode, where everything is now focused around LFO number 1, channel A, and the rest are in phase with it. Let's go back to our sine wave so we can see this a little bit clearer. So what you do is you've actually got it marked here, the phase, 0, 90, 180, 270, 360. If I stick this one on 90, that on 180, and this on 270, they will go brilliantly out of phase with reference to the speed of the first one. Which gives this lovely mellow sort of lilt to it, this movement, this change from one to the other. Of course you can put them into different places so they can be opposite each other or a bit more in sync, or all of them can be out or all of them can be in. It's variable, but it's also always going to be producing this kind of wave of modulation. The next mode is a divide mode. So whatever speed channel A is going, the rest will follow depending on where they are. Then the next mode is multiply, so it does the opposite. So whatever speed one is going, the rest will be faster than that, to a multiplication of it. And then back to free running. And that is pretty much it. That is why I really love this module, because it's simple, it's straightforward. You've basically got 4 channels of modulation. You can make them relate to each other, or you can just have them independently. So in any system, you can just take it, plug it into a filter cutoff, plug it into the volume on something, into a VCA, whatever you like, and you already got stuff going on. You've got movement, you've got a sense of drift, you've got a sense of adventure as you're going about your daily modular business. It's just totally brilliant. Stick some effects in. And very quickly it becomes a thing. You've got sync and reset on this row here for each of them independently, so you can reset each LFO on a trigger, and then you've got frequency control at the top here where you can modulate the frequency from another modulator. So, for instance, I can take the output of one channel from here and plug it into channel 1. This is now responding to speeding up and slowing down with the modulation of another waveform. So you can see they can get very versatile, very quickly. Now this introduced you to the Poti II, which is completely essential, I think. The essential companion. If you buy the Batumi II by itself, yeah, sure, that's fine. You get to select your waveforms and you get a brilliant, solid, straightforward Quad-LFO that can modulate itself, that can reset and sync, that has 12 outputs. It's a phenomenal module all by itself. But it is resplendent if you add the Poti II next to it. Why? Well, first of all, you've got a channel select button, so you can select the assignable waveform independently for each one, so they can all be different. So that's the first thing. The next thing you get is you get attenuation on the assignable outputs, the sine outputs, and also on the input to it, so you can sculpt it better. So with the sine waves, we can turn those down, so it's only doing a little bit of modulation rather than swinging the whole way. And that's something that the original Batumi didn't do. You needed something else to do the attenuation, otherwise you just got full fat modulation all the time. And with this, you can also, with the channel select, do it individually, or at the moment, as I've got them all selected together, I can do them all at once. And then this last section down here, 4 CV inputs. Now these shape the outputs. So you've got CV control over the shape of the sine wave. You've got CV control over the selection of the waveform, or you've got CV control over the pulse width modulation of the square wave. So what does that look like? So I'm going to take number 4 and I'm going to plug it into shape A, stick it onto sine channel. You can't do all of the channels at once, sadly. You have to choose what it is you're going to do. So I'm going to stick that in there, and that's going to fold this waveform. So we're getting a very different wave. If I put that into the assignable out, it then moves through the different waveforms. Or I can put it down to the square wave, and it becomes pulse width modulation. Or while it's shaping modulation, that can certainly be interesting, but perhaps a little bit too nuanced for what we're looking at here. But when we turn this into a VCO, it suddenly becomes very interesting indeed. But before we do that, let's just get some changeable stuff going on. Let's take some sync. We're going to sync it from Pamela's Pro Workout over there. So this is now running. In sync to that, which is also going to run our little sequencer here. I'm going to have this run the algo just to see what happens. Lovely, smashing great. So, let's use it as a VCO then. How do you do that? Well, you just wang everything up to the top. Well, obviously you're going to have to give it a sequence. Let's just use one for the moment. We'll use our first one here. So let's go back to our sine wave. There we go, beautiful sine wave. Now let's make that so we can hear it. So that's our 100 Hertz. And all we need to do is take the CV output of our little sequencer, plug it into the frequency input, and we have a VCO. The attenuation on the Poti is really useful because it tends to get a little bit gnarly when it's all the way up, and so it kind of gives us a little bit of volume control over the output of the VCO, which is, yes, very nice. Okay, so let's focus on our one channel here. I can take the output of one of the other channels and plug that into the shape. That's going to give me a rather nice bit of wave shaping. Over the waveform. We take the assigned output instead, switch this to assign. It's now going through each of the different waveforms, including the two random ones which essentially present as noise. But it does mean that potentially you could use some other modulator in order to select the waveform. Okay, so now the pulse output doesn't have a level output, so we might need to turn that down a little bit. But for pulse, you get some rather nice pulse width modulation. So maybe let's put that through a filter. Channel 1, I can select a nice sawtooth sound. While that's going on, I can take the output of another sequencer, plug that into channel 2, have that running by itself. Take another one. So it gets pretty interesting, really quick. Which is quite superb, quite superb. Now another possibility, as there are endless possibilities, is to give it a whole bunch of chords. So I'm going to take this little fella here, which is a marvelous module that generates chords out of various outputs. So if I plug these in, you can run it as a 4-voice synth. Essentially, it's not voices, it's just oscillators, but it's all confused. Let's try that. So I've got this output here, so that needs to go to there. Get rid of that, take that out of there, put that into there, take that out of there, put that into there. Right, let's see if that is going to give me anything. So I've now got 1, 2, 3, I need another one. 4 outputs from there, plugged into here. So the pianist here is generating chords. Chords you can see on the screen here. You could if the light wasn't shining on it quite so much. As it steps through the chords, those are just being played by the Batumi. So I've now got a lovely 4-oscillated thing going on, a polyphonic thing going on, just very simply from sine waves. Obviously it could be other waves, it could be different things, and I could also, modulate the heck out of it with something else. So if I go into here and turn it to sine, and lastly, I could take just two of the outputs I could take the assignable output of one of them, channel 3, I'm going to turn that wave to, I think it is already random out, and I could run that as the tune. So now I'm just using some randomization out of the Batumi into itself, into its own channel, while modulating the wave folding on that. And I've even got a free channel here that's not doing anything particular. I can put that somewhere else as well. You could split it into two lots of 2 VCOs. I mean, you'd have to put duplicates into the inputs here in order to make that work. But what I'm saying is that the Batumi II has this enormous amount of versatility and variation, all within its own deal, within its own thing. Back to some very simple modulation. I do love a bit of modulation, so that's the Batumi II. I hope I've given you a bit of a flavour as to what it can do. It is an awesomely solid 4-channel LFO. But the fact that you can wave shape, the fact that you can choose different waveforms for each channel, just keeps expanding it and elevating it to new levels of possibility. And then you can pull out some VCOs, you can make it run tunes, you can make it run chords, you can then wave fold those and pulse width modulate them. You can use them as genuine bona fide proper-like VCOs. Or use 2 of them as that, and 2 of them as modulators. Extraordinary bunch of stuff in there. So really we've got Behringer to thank for the Batumi II, because it was there treading on the toes of Chaos devices that made them really think that we could do more with this Batumi. We have this extraordinary idea and this extraordinary machine that we could do more with. And so they did. And so that's marvellous. And so we have this module now which can do so much more, so many different ways. It's a lovely thing to play with, and it's really interesting because my original Batumi, it would sit in my case and I'd plug in and modulate stuff, and that's what it would do. I'd just throw up a slider at the sort of speed that I want, and I was happy with that, satisfied with that. Whereas spending time working with this properly, trying to get to grips with the guts of it, it's a beautiful thing. It pulls out such levels of artistry that I didn't know that I was really thinking about. So I'm suddenly using it far more intentionally. There's not just the casual plugging in of a bit of modulation. Oh, LFO, yeah, turn that up. I'm now going, oh yeah, and now look, I'm now modulating this modulator in order to make the modulation more interesting. Just that simple thing, that simple action is beautiful. So there you go, hope that was helpful. In the meantime, go and make some tunes.